Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. This is Mr. Johnson Teaches My Last Duchess, the revision video. A reminder that you will find this as one of the poems, the 15 poems that you're studying as part of Power and Conflict, and it comes in your GCSE English Literature. It's paper 2, section B, and as a quick reminder, this is where you will be given one question, so no choice. You're given a question where the exam board name a poem, and it's up to you to pick a second poem which would compare to the first based on whatever the question might be, and we'll go into that a little bit more later. This is part of a series of videos that I'm doing, recapping the different videos as part of the anthology, so make sure you check out the other videos as part of your GCSE preparations. So you will need to be ready to pause this video at different points and absolutely make sure you're listening, but also with pen in hand, because it's really important that you're making notes as we go through, and your own notes will mean that you're more likely to remember what you've written down. So here we go then, let's get moving with this. Firstly, what you are going to need is a copy of the poem in front of you. So therefore, if you've got your anthology to hand, brilliant, that's going to be great. If you haven't, then you may need to copy one or print one off of the internet. If you just stick Browning My Last Duchess into a search engine, it will come up pretty quickly, and that will give you a copy of the poem. So if you haven't got one ready, pause this video now and go and get yourself one. And if you have, we will move on. Before we read any more or do any more with this one, just want you to key thing to remember, please, really, is power. This is a poem which absolutely fits power, and while you can make arguments for conflict, this really is one which is about control, and the words power and control are almost synonymous, which means they almost go hand in hand and mean very similar things. And that painting sort of on the right hand side just sort of even shows that, really, with the dog looking up to his master. And in many ways this is a poem where the master, in this case the Duke, is controlling somebody or something, or in this case it's the Duchess, who is no longer around. So what I want you to do now is pause this video and have a read through the poem yourself. I imagine it's going to take 2 or 3 minutes, but do that so you're familiar with some of it before I go back through it through the course of this video. It's just a really important step. There's no point going at this poem if you haven't read it before or haven't read it for many months. So pause this video now, please. And then I'm going to give you some information about Robert Browning, so this is the time to have your pen ready. Robert Browning was a British poet, and he was also a playwright. He was particularly well known, as I've put there, for his use of the dramatic monologue. The monologue being like one side of a conversation. A dialogue is where you've got 2 sides. Mono, meaning one, basically is that one-sided conversation, if you like, so it's not really a conversation. And this poem absolutely fits into that as well. Worth noting as well, he was fascinated, as it says there, by the Italian Renaissance, which once again ties in really well with this poem, which we'll see in a minute, because it's set very much sort of around that era, or inspired by that era, it seems. He also lived for much of his life in Italy, I've put there as well. And once again, this is a poem which is set in that country, so you can sort of see how those elements I've put on the screen there tie in with what features in the poem. Some context for you as well then. So the poems I've put there is written as a dramatic monologue, we've just touched on that, but it's from the point of view of a Duke of Ferrara. Now Ferrara, as I've put on that second bullet point, it's an area in Italy. And in 1561, this is a little bit of history which ties in. 1561, the Duke of Ferrara's wife died suspiciously. Some suspected she'd been poisoned, and it seems quite likely this is going to be the inspiration for Browning's poem, because this poem absolutely sort of has the death, the recent death of a duchess, and the hints are certainly there that the Duke is maybe responsible, has had a hand in her death. So you can maybe see the inspiration there. The poem also seems to portray, I've put here, a patriarchal society, and I've put in brackets there what that means. It's like a male-led, dominated society where the Duke has ultimate power over everybody around him, and there seems to be this fear and control that he has. So patriarchal is a really nice way of describing that, and a really good word to use. It features quite well for other texts that you study in your GCSE literature for English. And finally, that bullet point really summarises the poem is essentially him seemingly bragging about his last Duchess to a messenger. This messenger seems to be sort of going to between him and somebody else, and it sort of turns out that he is going to be marrying somebody else, his next Duchess, and he's just showing this messenger around, and then he sees a painting of his last Duchess, and he was angered because this last Duchess didn't seem to show him the respect he feels he was deserved. He's got an ancient family name, so it's a name which has sort of been going on for generations. Anyway, I won't go on too much longer, but that gives you a little bit of context, which is worth writing down on your page, and wherever possible, trying to just bring some of that into any answers you might write, which includes this poem. So let's focus on the title as well. I always say this, never overlook a title. And don't forget, in an exam, you could use a title as a quote if you can't remember any quotes from the poem. And this is a great one for that. My Last Duchess. My is a possessive word, or it's something to do with a possession. My, belonging to, and it almost sounds almost semi-aggressive in some settings as well. Last Duchess. Well, last implies that there will be more, like they're part of a list, almost making it seem maybe a little bit throwaway, you could perhaps argue. Like just done with that one, that was my last one, here comes my next one. And Duchess is a sign of status. He is a duke, Duchess. It all has this sort of very much a hierarchy feel to it as well. So 3 words in a title, all 3 very key words. And then looking at this one as well, this is the form of the poem. So it's layout on the page. So once again, there is the idea of it being a dramatic monologue. There are no stanzas here as well. There are no breaks, therefore. And what I've put in brackets, though, I feel is true. It makes it feel really quite intense. The fact there isn't a pause for us as we're reading right through this poem. Coupled with that, there's lots of enjambment there as well. And there's caesura, which is where you have the breaks in the middle of lines. So you'll find that full stops are occurring in the middle of lines there. Again, which makes this sort of feel quite intense because you don't know where these pauses are coming. And it also adds to this feel of being quite strong-willed. This fact that the lines are sort of pouring over, that maybe the Duke is very, very intense or is very passionate and has a lot to get off of his chest. Also on that third bullet point there, worth pointing out the rhyming couplets throughout this poem as well, and also this iambic pentameter, which is your 10 beats in a line, which alternate with stressed and unstressed beats. But all of those things coupled together, the rhyming couplets and the iambic pentameter, show a real element of control. This is a poem which is written very precisely if you're going to have those rhyming couplets and have that iambic pentameter, and therefore that shows a real control from the poet, mirroring perhaps the real control of the speaker, who is the Duke in this poem. So let's get into the poem then. I'm not going to be able to talk about every single line in the limited time I have, but I will draw your attention to maybe some key things that you definitely want to annotate on your copy and maybe go back and think a little bit more about. For example, Ferrara is the place in Italy, as we've said, and then it goes, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall, referring to a painting of her, looking as if she were alive. Read into that she isn't, that she is dead, therefore. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands. Frau Pandolf gets referred to a couple of times. That's the name of the painter, who the person who has painted the picture of his last Duchess. He talks about how he worked busily on her. He's asking the messenger who's there, won't you please sit and look at her? He then goes and talks about the passion of her glance. But to myself they turned, he says near the bottom there, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. That bit is really important. So he has this painting of his last Duchess, and it's a real element of control. It's behind a curtain, and no one draws back, no one opens this curtain but he, the Duke, and therefore that almost, he's still got control over her even though she's dead. And it really sort of just carries that whole theme of this poem. It goes on to talk about the painting a bit more, and seemed as if they would ask me, talking about other people, if they durst. Durst is an old-fashioned way of saying dared, and that really sort of again shows the element of control the Duke has over other people, that if people dare do something, implying that they wouldn't, and it almost seems quite threatening and sinister in its tone. And then it goes on a little bit more. I'm just scanning down through. He talks about the joy in the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chance to say her mantle laps over her wrist too much. But this bit, the next quote, is quite a key one. Paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Now, the half flush is sort of talking about the natural colour of her skin, but the fact he uses the key words there, dies, and throat, both are really quite sinister. Dies obviously has connotations or direct links to death. He doesn't mean literally. He's talking about the colour which sort of runs out, that it stops. But he uses the word dies instead. When something dies, it stops as well, which is really quite sinister. And we've also got the idea of referring to her throat, and that almost has these deathly connotations as well. It goes on to say, she had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. He doesn't like or didn't like the fact that his wife, the Duchess, was too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere, almost implying, well, how dare she looked everywhere? How dare she sort of had joy in everything, when she should have just had joy in me? He wants to control her, and that almost seems like there's a real feeling of jealousy there. It goes through further on. It talks about she rides this white mule around on the terrace, and all of them would like make her happy. Near the bottom there, she thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. She was so happy with anything. It's almost like anything is as important as the name that I gave her when she married me, his surname, which gives a power status because it's a really old country name handed down for generations. And he's really angry about that. He goes on to say, who stooped to blame this sort of trifling? Stoop is to bend down. He doesn't like this idea of stooping, and it comes up again in a moment. But this is where it sort of really becomes very jealousy as well. Because Ian then would be some stooping. This is sort of a way down on the page here that we're looking at. And I chose never to stoop. That line I would really draw your attention to is one which is quite memorable, and again just shows that power and control she has. Oh, sir, she smiled no doubt where'er I passed her, but who passed her without much the same smile? Yes, she smiled at me when I passed her, but she smiled at everybody. Near the bottom there, final bit there, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. That is the strongest hint we get that he in some way was perhaps responsible for her end and her demise, but it never says it any more clearly than that. But it certainly seems like there's a strong implication that he has had some hand in her death. And then he goes on to say, there she stands, as if alive. So he's now referring to the painting again. Will it please you to rise? To the messenger he's saying, right, do you want to get up then? Shall we go off, meet the company below? The Count your master's no munificence. So he's now referring to the messenger's master, a count. Now the count is sort of another formal title like duke and earl and count. So it seems like he's about to marry the daughter of a count, which is where he refers to the word dowry. And dowry was sort of an amount of money that would go with a daughter when she got married, and that would go to her new husband. But the thing I want to draw your final attention to, which is where the image comes in there as well, is he says, notice Neptune though, taming a seahorse, though a rarity. This bronze statue of Neptune taming a seahorse, which almost mirrors the idea of what he does with his wives, this control, taming them and controlling them. So, power and control are the two themes I'd really draw your attention to. Earlier on I mentioned patriarchal power, this idea of male power, and while that sort of fits into this sort of the setting of this poem, which feels like it is at least several hundred years old in its origin, or where it's set, it almost has this real oppression of women as well, and this very much this objectification is a really good word. You may be familiar with personification, which is making something not alive seem alive, but the very opposite of that is making something which is alive seem like a controlled possession, an object, and that is what you would call objectification. These questions are worth pausing. I'm not going to have time to go through them now, but pause this slide and use them to go back to the page and annotate the poem. Chances are you've probably just listened to me all the way through, but it's really important that you actually go back and add some notes to your copy of this poem, which is a really good one. What comparisons perhaps could we make with other poems? Well, if we're talking about power and control, then certainly Ozymandias would be a really good one there, because Ozymandias is about the idea of power, a very different sort of power perhaps, but certainly dominant power, and that's where it compares really well. I think also like it could compare with something really different, which is maybe something like where Remains is about a loss of power and a soldier who maybe has power in his job but has lost it because of the way his mind is overpowering him, very much compared to this one, which is strong power which is maintained by the Duke. So in some ways you can compare it because they're different. A question which I've come up with, which I think is worth having a go at to practice: how does Browning explore ideas about power? Now, the real exam question would actually ask you to name a poem and then ask you to compare it with another. I'm just asking you to focus on that one poem as part of this revision. When you come to write your own answer at the bottom there, I've put I would focus on the violent language and make that the method that you use. In the example you're about to see, I've used a different one, so I've almost tried to use maybe a harder example so you could focus on the violent language, which we've talked about is hinted at throughout. But I've got just enough time really to draw your attention to this as a model answer. PEAR is the method we've used here. The first bit, I've answered the question directly. The underlined bits are bits that you could use in your answer when you come to write it in a moment. The blue bit, notice in the last bit I've put he uses a metaphor, so I've named a method, and it's always important that you name a method when writing about a poem. The green is where I've embedded a quote. The red is bigger because that's where I've been analysing language. And finally, where I'm picking up most marks is both the red bit and the purple bit there, where I've mentioned the message of the poem. Pause it and read it to yourself, because I've run out of time, but I say thanks for listening and good luck.